We did see yesterday Labor unveiled its three-pillar pitch to try and boost Australia's economy. The opposition unveiled its long-awaited budget plan, which includes a crackdown on government spending and also targets multinational tax avoidance. Let's bring you some reaction and analysis now. Joining us live is Andrew McKellar, the CEO of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Andrew, appreciate your time. I do want to ask you about inflation as well, obviously, in a moment. But first, on this economic plan outlined yesterday by Labor, it focused on savings. It's looking at reducing outsourced contractors, for example. Labor's also saying it'll do this audit of what it's calling waste and rorts. And then there's this plan regarding multinationals. When Jim Chalmers talks about cracking down on multinationals with tax changes, is that good for Australian businesses, like Jim Chalmers was suggesting yesterday? Will it level the playing field?
Look, I think here, firstly, I would say it's very good that the economic reform agenda, the economic policy agenda is bubbling to the surface in the election debate because, of course, we need to understand the agenda that both of the major parties are bringing to the election and in terms of the agenda that they'll pursue for the next term. So, but look, what I would say is the most pressing issues from a business point of view that we need to be able to address in this election campaign context. The first is skills and labour. That's where the real pressure is. We need to be coming forward with a plan to promote skills in the Australian economy, to grow jobs, to ensure that we can get people into the jobs. Of course, issues like tax reform and how Australia positions itself in an international approach to level the playing field in terms of tax reform. I mean, those issues don't go away. They have to be looked at. And Australia should continue to work with other leading economies in terms of that reform agenda. But there's a huge amount of things that need to be done at home. Obviously, we need to continue to look at tax reform. We need to press forward with a plan to reduce company tax from where it is so that we can not only have smaller businesses operating on a lower tax, on 25% tax, but expand the net to pick up a range of medium-sized businesses and also to look at how we encourage business investment. Those are the priorities that we've got to be working on.
Okay, so picking up on that point of the labour force being, one of the priorities for business, there's been a lot of commentary, as you know, about wages not keeping up with inflation. We saw this inflation data out yesterday, that spike up to 5.1%. What broadly do you see that meaning for Australia's economic outlook?
Well, I think what it means is, we know that cost of living pressures are there. They are very present in the economy at the moment, and yesterday's figures brought that into stark relief. At the same time, the other side of the coin is that cost pressures are rising rapidly for business. We're seeing that supply chains are heavily disrupted around the world. That's been a result of the pandemic. It's been a result of some of the international events that are occurring at the moment. Those things are exacerbating that situation. So many businesses who've done it extremely tough over the past couple of years, they are now facing huge difficulties in accessing materials, in final goods to get to consumers. And the costs are rising sharply. So we're in a precarious situation. We need to proceed with caution. And here, the interaction between what happens with fiscal policy, what happens with monetary policy and interest rates in the months ahead, getting the wages equation right so that we don't just feed into an inflationary spiral. But instead, we've got to drive productivity. And that's the only way that we're going to get sustainable increases in real wages, in living standards in the next few years.
Okay, so you're suggesting that when Labor talks about wanting to see wage increases across the board, that's effectively increasing inflationary pressures, which then become even more problematic for workers. That's the inflationary spiral you're referring to?
Well, we all want to see sustainable increases in real wages, of course. That goes without saying, and business wants to see that as much as anybody else. But we can't have a situation where it's simply let's put wages up because that puts costs up. It feeds back into inflation. We're not at that point yet, but we have to be careful to avoid that, because if we get into that sort of cycle, and let's not forget, we are at a situation where supply chains are under the most pressure they've been under now for nearly 50 years. Labour shortages, same thing. So the risk that we create this sort of spiral, wage and price inflation spiral, we've got to be very careful about that. We have to have a real economic reform agenda to drive productivity. That will take some of that pressure off, and it will deliver real wage increases. Now, that's the plan that we need to see from both of the major parties to talk about how they're going to achieve that. You can't simply just say it's about increasing wages without any description about how that's going to be achieved.
Andrew, as someone who looks at all of these issues in very close detail, what's your expectation as to what the Reserve Bank will do with interest rates next week?
Look, next week, who knows? We'll see. That'll be their decision. But one thing that is absolutely clear is that we are, at some point in the coming months, going to commence a process where interest rates, the very short-term interest rates, will start to push up. That is inevitable. We've had interest rates at very low levels, at emergency levels. The emergency in that context is over. We are now seeing inflationary pressures coming back into the economy, and it's inevitable that interest rates will start to increase. The trick here is we've got to see that it's appropriately staged, that this doesn't become a situation where central banks around the world have to tighten excessively and squeeze the life out of the economy. But a measured response, an appropriate response by the Reserve Bank is inevitable over the coming months.
Andrew McKellar, we always appreciate you making the time for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Ash.